Hello pilots, this is Robert Fan66 and welcome to my channel. The topic of today's video is the Freewing 90mm F-22 Raptor. And we are talking about the so-called high-performance version, the one with the 1900 kV inrunner motor. I'm a fan of the F-22 for quite some time now. I even bought a smaller 70mm version not that long ago. Some of you might have seen my video about that model. But in late April I decided to go with the bigger 6S version. So I clicked a few buttons on a web page and a few days later the Raptor was lying on my doorstep. The packaging was good and the build quality was okay. Not that anything was broken or I had any dings or danks in the model. Just some of the glue joints at the nose of the plane looked really weird. You could see patches of so-called alligator skin through the paint job. Something that is certainly a borderline quality issue. And something that I didn't expect it. Certainly not on a plane that almost costs 600 euros right now. The build itself, if you wanna call it that, was almost too easy. You just have to connect a few cables to your receiver and put in a few screws and you are done. It probably took me longer to program my transmitter than to put this plane together. But of course I wanted to put at least a few little extras into this plane. And I'm talking about landing and positioning lights here. Due to the cloud camo this plane comes in, it can be very hard to see in the air, so every little bit helps. So I started by installing the power cables for the nav and landing lights, which turned out to be pretty easy, because the cable ducts are pretty roomy, so it's no problem to put in some extra wires. By the way, I chose to test a new light system on this plane, a small and relatively affordable light controller from an English company, Flightron, which showed very good results in earlier tests. It works on a 5-volt system and is even controllable with your transmitter, if you choose to do so. But you can also pre-program it so you don't need any controls at all, just a simple switch to turn it on or off. I printed 2 standard landing lights housing for this plane and installed them under the wings. Before I turned my attention to the nav lights, which were a bit more tricky on this model. Which is mostly due to the fact that the Raptor's nav lights are not installed on the edge of the wing. They are on the top and the bottom side, and a little bit away from the actual wingtip, which not only means that you need 2 LEDs, it also means that you have to install them practically on top of each other. After installing the LEDs, I printed a cover from a translucent material, which I glued right on top of the LED. The translucent material does not only hide the LED below, it also scatters the light, so the LEDs seem to shine brighter than without the cover. After testing the lights I just installed, which turned out pretty good in my opinion, I went on with a little bit of detail work here and there, like printing wheel covers for the mains and painting the landing gear and the gear doors. Which also made me think about a few parts the plane does not really need, like engine intake covers or a fake radar system. As I said, not really needed, but they look cool I think. I even downloaded a simple rail system and a camera housing from Thingiverse, which I installed on the bottom side of the fuselage, close to the center of gravity. It is lightweight, easy to print, easy to install and almost invisible when the plane is in flight. Usually I only use footage from my old and trusted GoPro 2, which I use as a headcam. But this runcam mount gives me the ability to spice up my videos with a little onboard footage from my runcam. Of course I would prefer to do my in-flight videos with a real cameraman, someone who can do a few close-up shots even in flight if possible. But unfortunately there's no one at our club who owns a decent video camera that we could use for that kind of thing. After I was done with all the tiny modifications, I went out to the field for a little taxiing test. And besides the fact that the plane turned a little bit to the right, it was pretty much uneventful. The plane was way more stable than I thought, even with a relatively narrow landing gear. But the footage of the taxiing test reminded me of something that I forgot to document. It was a little tip that was talked about in the forums, and that a buddy of mine who owns the same plane also confirmed. The F-22, at least in its standards configuration, can be a little bit bouncy on the nose wheel. For that reason, many pilots recommended to cut off 2 rings of the nose wheel spring and afterwards stretch it to its original length. This way you get a slightly softer oleo leg in the front. But if you fly on a hard surface runway, it is not really necessary. After the last tests, the only thing left to do was to wait for a day with decent weather and as less wind as possible. And this time I actually didn't have to wait that long. Just a few days later we had almost perfect conditions for a maiden flight. For the first flight I went with the stock CG as it is stated in the manual. But I used Freewing's recommended low rates as my high rates and even programmed a lower setting just in case. Because from what I have read online, the high rates usually are a little too high for most of the pilots. Power for this flight will be provided by a Hobby King 6S 5000 mAh heavy duty LiPo pack, which weighs about 840 grams. This and the small 3S 450 mAh LiPo pack I use to power the lights brings the total takeoff weight to about 3980 grams. This may sound a lot to some of you, but believe me it's not, and it certainly doesn't feel that way. Not on the sticks anyway. This plane takes off with ease and with lots of authority. And as you can see, I'm flying on a grass field here, so there's definitely no power issue here. Or in other words, high performance is not just a line of text on the box. Something I was worried about before I bought this plane was the landing gear. Something I'm kind of always worried about. The landing gear on this particular bird is kind of narrow, and it is not a trailing link suspension, it is just a normal one, which is not ideal for use on a grass field. But as it turned out, my concerns were not justified here. So the plane tracks very straight and handles all the little lumps and bumps on a normal grass field with ease. And I don't mean it is impossible to tip this plane over if you yank on the rudder, for example, but it is not that prone to tipping than I suspected. So Freewing's F-22 handles nice on the ground, and well, it handles nice in the air too. Or basically she can do everything you throw at her. And if she can't do something, it is more likely to be a problem of the pilot than the actual plane. But what really makes this plane stand out in my opinion is the fact that this plane is not only super agile and responsive, it is also very docile and almost gentle, and both at the same time for some weird reason. And there's another ability that is built into this plane that I really like. And this is the ability to glide or coast along or whatever you want to call it. Which in the end means it does not need its EDF running all the time. And if you are not a speed freak, this can come pretty handy because you can prolong your flight time. So in numbers that means with enough throttle management you can end up with flight times between 5 and 7 minutes, which is very good for a 90mm EDF on a 5000 mAh LiPo pack. And now to the important part. Everything that goes up have to come down eventually. So how are the landing characteristics? Besides the fact that it actually takes a few seconds to put the landing gear down, I'm pretty sure that you are also not surprised that they are good too. With full flaps extended, the plane slows down to a crawl and settles easily into a nice glide slope. The only thing noteworthy, I would say, is the fact that she does not like crosswinds very much. But let's be honest here, which plane really does like a crosswind? So with the right angle of attack, this plane touches down like a feather. So let's have a little recap and make a short pros and cons list about this plane. So first the pros. We have a powerful engine, excellent handling and flying characteristics, easy takeoffs and landings, good flight times, and she is grass capable. And what do we have on the con side? Minor quality issues. She is kind of expensive. And we have bad visibility due to the cloud camo. So there's not that much to complain about the F-22. But in the end it always comes down to two questions. Do I like the model? And can I afford it? And if you can answer both questions with a yes, I'm pretty sure you will not be disappointed. So I hope you enjoyed my short flight review of the Freewing F-22 Raptor. Thanks for watching and have fun at the flying field. Warbird Fan 66 out.